I would love to help 1,000 people become multimillionaires. That's a
Mm.
goal that I have. And the book is the first step in that. We're also launching a community where we're going to journey together.
Everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Abundant Journey podcast. We are so glad you're hanging out with us today. As always, Nick James here. I am here to be your host, along with my co-host, Nick Offenkamp. Nick, what's going on, man?
Hey, I'm excited. I'm excited about this morning. I'm excited about our guest. And one of my favorite things about doing this podcast is the number of connections that we've made from all over the United States and even a little bit beyond that. And I will let you introduce our guest. I'm not going to steal that thunder. So I'll throw it back to you and you can bring our guest in.
Yeah, no, thank you. And we are hanging out with Brian Tibbs today. He is a real estate investor, and he has an incredible story, both with mission work and also releasing a book here. We're going to dive into that today. He's got a lot of experience on raising capital. So, man, this conversation can go a lot of different directions. But before we do that, let's bring in, man, Brian. What's going on, man?
Hey guys, the Knicks. I'm so excited to have this opportunity to be here with you guys, and I'm not going to forget your name. So there we
go. No, that's easy. And I think I've referenced it multiple times, but we've had one episode with one other Nick, so it was 3 Nicks, and that was a little doozy. But other than that, we have fun hanging out with people.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, thanks again. I'm glad to be here.
Well,
100%.
Brian, absolutely, and thanks for spending some time with us. So, we love to get into the backstory. Before we do that, though, tell us a little bit about what a day in the life looks like for you today, and then maybe we'll jump into kind of your story and how you got here.
Yeah, so I've not been working a W-2 job, a salaried job since we retired from the mission work. So every day is a little bit different. I'm more actively involved in my real estate portfolio and the different funds that I've got deployed there. So one day I could be out at a property dealing with a city complaint, or I could be out working with a contractor deciding which direction to go. Found a problem with the piping, or we got cheaper materials, or whatever. Just kind of dealing with a remodel job. Or working with my team that we do short-term rentals both in Idaho and Arizona, working with them to try to figure out how to dial in our systems a little bit tighter. So, the life of an entrepreneur every day is different, which is the way I love it, right? I would struggle if I was stuck in a routine where everything the same happened every day. So,
No doubt. That's awesome. And you're full time now then with what you're doing in real estate investing, full time and managing your portfolio.
Yeah, that's what I would say. If someone asks me, what do I do? I say I'm a real estate investor. Now, one of my motivations when we came back from the mission work is to spend more time with my kids. And so I do focus on time with family and with my wife and around the house as well. So I'm trying not to, but my nature is to go pretty hard, but I'm trying not to be, that full time, hardcore moving forward, and trying to stay more balanced.
Totally. It's a tricky balance
Yeah.
because entrepreneurship does demand so much, and there's so much opportunity,
Yeah.
especially once the ball gets rolling.
Yep.
And so to figure out how to press that gas pedal and remember your why and what you're trying to have your entrepreneurship enable you to do with family, that's a big deal. Give us just a little bit of insight on just the family makeup. How old are your kids? How many kids do you got?
Yeah, so we got 3 kids. My oldest daughter is 18. She'll be graduating this year, May, which is freaky.
Wild,
and then
man.
my 15-year-old son, he's a freshman, and then my 13-year-old daughter is the last one. So we have 3.
Okay. And in the teenage years, man,
Yeah.
we could do a whole nother podcast, I'm sure, just on giving us, both Nick and I, we both have 3 kids, but ours are about 10 years younger. We're about 10 years behind in terms of our kids' ages. So, part of me just jumps at like, oh man, I need to ask a whole bunch of questions there, but I will refrain. We'll keep this to your story in entrepreneurship. But, if you want to drop any parenting gold nuggets in there,
absolutely,
none of us are going to complain.
That's right.
Well, I'll tell you what, here's the one thing I will say on that is, sometimes you say, oh, I love it when they're 4 and they're 7. every age is so amazing.
Hmm.
And now that my daughter's about to graduate, I'm like much more conscious of every single opportunity that we have to spend together because I know she's flying the coop. And that's, sometimes that's thought of as like the mom is the one that freaks out about that. But I'm, I'm not looking forward to that,
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
so I will just say, just enjoy every age, every advancement, every change. It's all part of the fun journey.
That's a good word.
Absolutely. No, that's a good word, and I think that's a great way to start the show. So let's jump here back into your story. Again, I alluded to the fact that you've done a lot of mission work, but let's even go back further than that if you want and tell us kind of your upbringing, your story. Were there entrepreneurs in your life early on? What did life look like in the early years?
Yeah, so I had the opportunity, a real good opportunity to grow up in a family of entrepreneurs. So, my dad's father he owned a tractor dealership. So he was kind of in a farming community, but he owned a tractor dealership and was always involved in some sort of entrepreneurial thing. And then my dad started his own company when I was young, and so that's all I knew was business ownership in the family. And so that's really where I was exposed to the concepts of entrepreneurship and even to a lesser extent real estate investing, although that was not my dad's primary focus. In fact, I was in my late teens before I'd even heard of renting or renting out to strangers, and building a business that way. So that was new to me. But yeah, I grew up in that environment where whatever income we were going to generate, it was based on our effort and our investment and our ingenuity and all that kind of stuff. And that was vital for me.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's unique, right? Like a lot of the folks that we've had, I would say even the majority of the folks that we've had on the show kind of grew up in the parents were working W-2 jobs
Yeah.
and they saw an opportunity to jump and build something of their own. But I imagine that has to be profoundly impactful when that's just the culture of your family that you grew
Yeah.
up in, seeing the entrepreneurship. Um, did you see struggles in that too? Like as you were growing up, were there ever points where you're like, oh man, based upon like the struggles that my family's seen in entrepreneurship, maybe I should just do a W-2 gig. Maybe entrepreneurship's not the way.
Well, I don't, as a teenager, I don't know that I had that deep of thinking, to be real
Sure.
clear and honest. Um, but I was always wired for this. And I think my environment has a lot to do with that. Your environment kind of sets you in a certain direction. And nobody in my family was surprised
Mhm.
when I graduated from college and I really kind of went down that path of business first, which of course later in my story I basically abandoned all that and went overseas to serve in the mission field. But nobody was surprised that that was the course that I took. That said, I went and got W-2 jobs in high school and in college, and yeah, nobody was forcing me to do anything. So, but I have siblings that have W-2 jobs now. So just because you grew up in a entrepreneurial family doesn't necessarily mean that that's what you're going to do.
Yeah, 100%. Well, maybe we can jump to, since you've alluded to going to college and then starting a business or starting an entrepreneurship early before taking a hard turn into a missionary career. You want to tell us what your first steps in entrepreneurship yourself were?
Yeah, so I had in my mind, and I don't know even where I heard this, but I had in my mind that the wealthiest people are wealthy from real estate.
Mhm.
And I couldn't point to a person that was the case or a book that I'd read, but that was an idea that I had in my head. And so I kind of wanted to be in real estate from the beginning. And the very first investment that I made, I was 19, I was in college, and I literally just wanted to live for free. I didn't want to pay for housing. And so I bought a duplex and put a tenant in one side and rented out and lived in the other. And that's, today we call that house hacking. But back in the day, it was live in one side and rent out the other. So that's
Yeah.
what I did. And then I got roommates from college to stay in the extra room on my side and almost covered my mortgage, which
Well,
I was trying to cover the whole thing. But in hindsight, that was pretty much a home run to be able to almost cover that expense. So that was my first entrance into real estate investing, and then from there, I just kept as quickly as I could, adding more units.
So did you have anybody in that teaching you how to do that, or was that something kind of self-taught? I mean, I'm sure that was kind of the day before all of the digital courses and
Oh
YouTube
yeah.
options and stuff. So I mean, where did you learn that, or was it just kind of, hey, I'm going to take that entrepreneurial spirit of my family and learn something new?
Yeah, so actually, and I have a story about this in my book that's coming out here real soon, about the first moment that I really kind of decided I want to do real estate. And it was, I overheard a conversation between my grandfather and my dad. And they were talking about buying a duplex, which I didn't even know what a duplex was. And I was just kind of listening in, and I thought they were nuts. I'm like, why would you, who wants to go unclog a toilet at 2 a.m? Who wants to deal with somebody who doesn't pay you their rent and then you got to pay the mortgage? And it just was so baffling to me why anybody would do that. And so I kind of interrupted them, and they were somewhat surprised that I was listening. I was like 16 or 17 at the time, and had never shown any interest in any adult conversations. um, and 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 they kind of took it a challenge upon themselves to walk me through the thinking and walk me through the process. And we were probably talking for 2 or 3 hours or something like that, to where I finally came to the conclusion of understanding, okay, they're going to get a management company that's going to deal with the toilets. They're going to screen the tenants, and they've put in budget in case somebody doesn't pay, and they've still got this all figured out. And it was magical to me. And so that, I would say, that was my primary influence. And then, of course, as you get into it, you have agents, and you have handymen, and you have all these different kind of components that come along, and you kind of piece it together. But yeah, it was 1996, well before the time of having any online education, YouTube University, all that kind of stuff
Yeah.
didn't exist. And so I just kind of figured it out. And actually, a funny anecdote to that. So I left the business world, went to the mission field for 16 years, came back in 2021. And when I decided, okay, I'm just going to pour my energy, my career energy, into expanding my real estate portfolio, I had 17 units at the time. And I said to myself, in a moment of honesty, I don't know what I'm doing.
Mm.
I've been out of the country for 16 years. I've only had like a quarter of my brain power even looking at this stuff. I've been really focused on the mission. And so I would just, sell something I didn't like anymore and buy something else. And I always bought, just off the MLS. I didn't know anything else. So I went to Google and I typed real estate education, and bigger pockets was one of the first things that came up. And bigger pockets, isn't it supposed to be deeper pockets? so so I clicked the button, and from there I started listening to Brandon, and then Brandon and David, and then
Yeah.
went through the kind of the whole series of their podcasts, and then I felt like I was somewhat educated, and so and here I am now.
Yeah. Oh, and I imagine that there was probably a cool experience in that of, learning some new things, but also them putting language to a lot of things that
Yeah.
it sounds like you were just intuitively doing, like the house hacking. Maybe you didn't have the term for it then, but
Right.
that's kind of Turner was the one that had introduced me to that concept. And of
Right.
course, I'm excited for you to unpack that. We'll get to that a little
Sure.
bit further, because I think that's as I understand it, a big component of your work and your book, and how you help people get into real estate investing. So I'm excited to dive in more there. But as you started building your real estate portfolio just out of college, 19 years old, did you have big goals for it then? Like, were you doing the equity play of that I'm going to buy and hold these properties forever? Did you have kind of the mindset of that, hey, I'm just trying to cash flow here? And then what was the initial vision, or was it really just let's build this plane while it's in the air? And
yeah, 100%. Yeah, there was no, well, I would say that the extent of my goals was I wanted to add at least one unit every year.
okay.
So that was my goal. So if I bought a duplex, okay, I'm set for 2 years, right? And I did for the first 10 years before I moved. Well, it was a little bit quicker than that. I moved to Guatemala in 2005. So in the 9 year span, I got to 10 units before
Wow.
we left for the field. I ended up selling 6 of those 10. But anyway, that was a different motivation, right? But yeah, I got to 10 units before I was 25.
Yeah.
So in that, Brian, you had obviously been growing this. You probably saw some level of the trajectory this was going to take you in terms of success, and you were seeing the power of real estate, both with equity and appreciation, also cash flow. But then you did make a pretty significant shift and jumping into the mission field. So kind of walk through that part of the story.
Yeah, so cash flow, there was no cash flow. So back, my first loan was a 9% interest loan,
Hmm.
and which was why it was hard to cover the mortgage even with tenants and roommates. And so, and I was born and raised in Idaho, and that's where I started investing. And in that time, now it's known as an expensive market, but in that time, it was like sluggish growth, and so the real estate wasn't really performing super well until like that 2005, 2006 timeframe when everything just kind of exploded. And fortunately, that's when I sold 6 of my 10 units, and so I paid off the other mortgages and moved overseas,
Hmm.
and went in a different direction.
Yeah. And let's talk about that. I mean, that's a big move for anybody to make. And so, what was going on, in as much as you're willing to share behind the scenes, that made you go, all right, while real estate has been good, I'm growing this portfolio. I'm going to leave it all behind and do something totally different.
Yeah, so it wasn't something that I wanted to do. That's the honest answer.
Mm.
But at the time I was dating who's now my wife, Jill Bramhall, and had this, I just had this feeling. I'm not going to say that I heard an audible voice of God or anything like that, but I just had this sensation, I had this feeling that this is not what you're supposed to be doing. You're
Mm.
supposed to be a missionary. And I didn't have any clue what that meant. There's nobody in my family that was ever a pastor or a missionary or anything like that.
Mm.
And so it just seemed like, well, this is just some weird thing in my own head. And it just wouldn't go away. So took me about a year to go from when I first kind of started feeling that tug to where I finally said, okay, I'll do it. And I was kind of angry. I was kind of bitter. I was like, I'm going to have to quit the work that I'm doing. I'm going to lose my business. I'm probably going to lose my girlfriend because we'd never talked about anything like this. And so and I was like, I'm gonna have to talk to her and say, hey, I'm gonna move to Africa and I'm gonna start speaking like language, right, or something like that. And so I just assumed that the relationship was over. So it was a Sunday. I remember I was telling her that I had made the decision to go, and I was almost like depressed about it. Like, this is something that I feel like I have to do, and I'm sorry, and
Mm.
I knew wasn't what you signed up for, and that kind of stuff. And she said, well, that's funny. I've always felt a call to be a missionary as well. So I went from thinking I'm losing my girlfriend, to we got engaged not too long after that, and
Huh.
got married. And then a year after we got married, we moved sight unseen to Guatemala with what could fit in her 2 suitcases and my 2 suitcases, and away we went.
Wow. Oh my goodness. And what was the work initially? Like, what was the calling down to Guatemala, and what did you start doing there?
Yeah, so we literally just showed up as volunteers, and she and I just kind of said we're just working for a church, and we said, we can do anything for 2 years. So we signed a 2-year volunteer contract. We can do anything for 2 years. So let's just go figure it out, and we'll see what happens. So we moved to Guatemala. We were working in a mission office doing nothing significant. And me being the entrepreneur, I was like, yeah, I want to do something impactful, and I want to plant churches. And so we ended up, after 1 year in Guatemala, we moved to Argentina, and we started our own nonprofit. Ardeo Global was its name, and its mission was to plant churches. And over the course of the following 15 years, so we were there 16 years total, over the course of 15 years, we recruited, trained, and sent somewhere around 380 missionaries, planted 96 churches in 11 different countries, raised over $20 million for all the church buildings and the missionary support and all that kind of stuff. And then we finished all that in 2021.
Wow.
My word. That's what a ride over
Yeah.
those 15 years. And
Yeah.
you'd mentioned kind of before we hit record on the show too, that 5 different countries that you had lived in during that time as well, all in South America.
So Guatemala is Central America, and then Argentina, Peru, Ecuador, and Brazil are South America.
Okay. Oh man, that's wild.
I get it. Where do you go from that? But shifting in the entrepreneurial spirit, I'm sure there's so many things you learn along the way that's translated to today. Both with raising money and assembling teams and training. So maybe tell us a couple of your favorite things you learned, and if you want, maybe some things that were challenging. I mean, what did you love? What's translated to what you're doing today, and maybe what were some hard things about it?
Yeah, man. Every step of life is formative for the next step. I think that's unavoidable, both good and bad. And for sure, the work that I did as an entrepreneur beforehand absolutely shaped my work going into it. I didn't have church culture. I didn't have mission culture. I had entrepreneur culture. And that absolutely was the driving factor in whatever success we had. And because I didn't think like an institution, I thought like an entrepreneur. For example, I didn't take any pay for the first 3 years when we started the nonprofit. That's just when you start a business, that's what you do. You don't get paid. And so every dollar that came in, rather than using it to pay my bills, I pushed it back out to invest in growth. And so, and then I will say the same thing now, my phase in life now. The influence of mission work is undeniable. The work that I've done with really wealthy families that funded a lot of what we did has helped shape my understanding of what money is for in a profound way. And that's why world-changing generosity is a big part of what I'm trying to support and sponsor and promote now. Because this has been very impactful for me personally. I would, whenever you have to ask someone for money, there's a human part of you that hates that, right? And I would go into any meeting, any fundraising meeting with a little bit of anxiety. It got better over the years, but I would go in with some anxiety, like I'm about to ask this person for money and they worked hard for it. And am I going to be a good steward of it? And are they going to kick me out of their house? That kind of stuff. Never was that encounter a negative thing. And almost never was it something that they didn't thank me for coming and asking. And I found that people who'd been really successful, that had figured out how to use their money to change the world through their generosity, are the happiest, most well-adjusted, most accomplished people that I've been able to associate with. And I think that if you get to a certain level of wealth and success, and you can embrace that part of your responsibility with what you've been entrusted with, it can be a real kick to where you find something that makes, find a cause that brings you to tears when there's an injustice in the world, or there's an emptiness, or there's something that is lacking in someone's life. And through your obedience and generosity, you can have a true impact on that life, on that town, on that city, on that country. And just know, even if nobody else knows, but that you've made a true impact on the world. I mean, that's so much better than saying, hey, I bought my jet, or, that other stuff that we spend our resources on for our own comfort. It just is so small in comparison.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love that reframing of giving people the opportunity to give. I mean, we think about it in terms of like on the entrepreneurial side, you find a deal and you bring the deal to your wealthy investors, and they're so grateful to have the opportunity if it's a real deal. But that's very similar with all the opportunity to do good in the world with your generosity. Like you're the conduit of bringing them the deal to do good with their funds and invest in people and places who need it most and where it can have the most impact. And so I can totally see, while it feels counterintuitive at first, why people would thank you for bringing them that opportunity to do good in the world with the money that they've earned and made.
Yeah. I think that's true. So that has shaped part of what I'm doing, but also, something you were saying about challenges. The biggest thing that I struggled with that I'm so grateful for now that I'm in the United States, outside the United States, specifically in Latin America, which is my experience, government is not in support of the entrepreneur. Government is in opposition to the entrepreneur, and the systems are built to. And I think the intent is good. It's to support the working class. It's to support the poor class. But it makes life as an entrepreneur is extremely difficult there. In the nonprofit sector specifically is my response, my experience in that, but in the for-profit sector as well. So coming here into the United States, where I can click a button and same day receive something from Amazon, as an example, that's like living in heaven.
Yeah.
Getting your driver's license in 45 minutes, that is like, oh my gosh, it didn't take me 6 months. This is amazing. And getting a business license or getting an LLC formed in 25 minutes with $25. Just all of the things that the opportunities that we have in America. So this is something that I like to share with people is we live in a country where we are encouraged to, and the platforms are set up to make us successful. And there's opportunities all over the place. Sometimes I hear someone say, well, I'm just waiting for an opportunity to fall in my lap. And I have a saying that kind of tries to reframe that. Opportunities don't fall in our lap. Opportunities pass through our line of sight. If we recognize them as an opportunity, we got to reach out and grab it before it flies right on by and somebody else takes it. So we live in a land of opportunities. We've got to learn how to identify those opportunities. And then we got to have the guts to grab them and do something with them. So that's been formative as well from my time in Latin America.
Love that. That's so good. And I think your vantage point of being out of the country, we've had a few other folks in similar situations. And I love that part, just to get to kind of dive into what culture is like there and how those sorts of things just play out very differently, because most of us aren't familiar with that. So let's shift a little bit here as I want to spend some time talking about the book and what you're doing today, but let's kind of get you to present day. So you guys came home, and really, what was the thought process, the strategy? I mean, were you coming home saying, "Hey, we're going to get after real estate some more," or what were you thinking?
Yeah, we had been overseas for 16 years, and we had just gone through COVID, which COVID in the U.S. was tough, but COVID in South America, man, it was locked down. Things, the medical infrastructure is not as good, and there's a lot more fear and maybe a lot more government control than what we're used to in the U.S. And it was just, as ministry is all about being in the streets, being in the communities, being in homes, being in busy shopping centers where we have access to people, and that was all closed. And so it was a very, very difficult time from a ministerial standpoint. Plus, our kids were now entering high school, and they had all gone to 5 different schools over their early education years. And so we just decided, okay, this is what we have done in the field is what we have done. It is time for us to go back. And so we came back to the U.S., planted ourselves here in Phoenix, and I knew I was going to do something in real estate, but I really didn't have any grand plans. Did not have a plan to write a book or do any of that other stuff. We were just going to come back and decompress. And another one of the factors is our portfolio had grown to the point to where we didn't need to work. I didn't need a job. I didn't need the paycheck that I was getting from the nonprofit. And so we decided, okay, well, we're going to come back. We're going to take a year off, and we're just going to see what develops.
How amazing that must have been. So that was because, as I wrote in my notes, you had sold about half of your properties, but you'd kept the other half, and you'd paid them off pretty much before moving out of the country. And so just through appreciation and rental growth, I take it that's how you were able to, sustain, come back to already having a sustainable living through that.
Yeah. So we had 10 units, sold 6 of them, paid off the other 4. And then the world fell apart. So 2008, 2009 was a disaster, but we had a little bit of cash still laying around from the liquidation of those units. And so in 2009, I started investing again fairly
Okay.
aggressively. And we built our portfolio up to 17 units by the
Okay.
time we left in 2021. And we would we'd go back to the States for like a 6 week, visit family and raise money and that kind of stuff every year. And it was during that time that I would take a look at what I had and, okay, what do I want to get rid of? Let's upgrade this. Let's sell two and buy four. That kind of
Yep.
stuff is what we did, on a very, very part-time basis over the years.
Yeah. That's awesome though. I mean, what a amazing thing to be able to come home to, having these
Yeah.
assets. And at that point, as you were kind of with whatever capacity you had while you're out of the country purchasing properties, still doing single family duplexes, or were you starting to diversify the asset classes that you were real estate investing in?
Yeah, so I had single families, duplexes, fourplexes, was what my portfolio was made up of, and it's kind of a fun pivot story. In 2016, we had actually come back to the U.S., but because we had tenants in all of our properties, we had to ask to stay with people. And there was this one couple that had a house for us that we were able to stay in. So we were flying all night long. We get to the house at 1 o'clock in the morning and walk in, and I took like 3 steps before I realized I was walking in water. So the house had flooded. And, it's early in the morning. I call the owner. We get the water main shut off. He comes to kind of assess the situation. And by 3 o'clock in the morning, we're crashing in a hotel. Well, there's 5 of us. And at that time, our kids were quite a bit younger. And I just remember waking up the next morning and telling my wife, we can't stay here for 3 weeks. We can't be in this hotel for 3 weeks. And so she's like, well, why don't you go look up that what is it called? Airbnb. Oh yeah. Okay. So we pulled up Airbnb and I looked for 3 bedroom furnished homes in Boise. There were only 3 and they were all like $200 a night. And after I stopped complaining about how expensive that was and the limit of options, I was like, wait a minute. How much am I getting per night for my houses? It's like $30 a night is what I'm getting. So 2 months later, I did a test on two or three of my units, and then 2 months after that, I switched everything over to short-term rentals. And from
Okay.
there, we started kind of getting away from the fourplex and going back to nicer single-family homes. And we have some duplexes and stuff still too, but we primarily focus on single-family homes.
Okay. Wow. That's a cool shift as far as, and I love how there's a theme here of kind of just stumbling upon these amazing opportunities and being somewhat early to them, right? You were saying
Yeah,
2017 is when you made the shift.
2016.
2016.
2016. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's really before the explosion of growth
Oh,
in
yeah.
the Boise area.
Yeah.
That's incredible. I love it. Okay, sorry, but then you came back. You've got these 17 units, kind of decompressing and figuring out what the next steps are. Walk us through just how that has unfolded since 2021. The opportunities that you've come across, and sort of the refining of the vision of how you're using your time, what you're building, what you're growing.
Yeah. Anybody who knows me knows I'm a goal setter, and so I said, here's what I want to do. I want to kind of leverage the Boise properties, and I want to double my portfolio in 2 years. And so, because I'm dedicated to this full time, why not? So we did. We're now at 35 units, and we did that in about a year and a half. And at the start of 2023, actually launched my first um, investment fund or investor pool. I'd always just invested with myself, and so now I'm bringing on investors, and we're doing the ride together. I'm just using kind of my knowledge and experience and sweat and work
Hmm.
and bringing in investor money to try to grow the portfolio forward. So that's what we're going to want to work on here going forward.
Cool.
No, that's great. And so again, the book, it's something you didn't set out to do, but it's kind of, you've stumbled, I'm sure, into that as you've stumbled into multiple different things. So where did the idea come from with the book? And let's dive in there a little bit.
Yeah, so it wasn't an easy decision to decide to stop doing the mission work because that was so much a part of our lives. And,
Of course.
you go through, maybe anybody who's been in ministry can identify with kind of that struggle of, is it okay if I stop doing this? Like, am I allowed to stop doing this? And do I need to get a certified letter from heaven or something to with permission? So it wasn't an easy process. And when we finally did decide to do it, well, in the process, I was kind of consulting with some people that I trusted and respected, and and that they would always ask, well, what are you going to do next? And I'm like, well, nothing. I'm not going to do anything. Well, how are you going to pay the bills? And then, I kind of sheepishly kind of explained the situation, and I remember this one conversation. This guy goes, "How old are you?" And at the time, I said, "Well, I'm 44." And he goes, "And you don't have to work? Like, you have enough savings to live for a whole year?" And I'm like, "Well, we've built up a portfolio, and I don't need to go get a job. It's covering our costs and growing still." And he's like, "How much did you make as a missionary?" Like, kind of like that taboo
Yeah.
question. And the answer, I didn't know at the time, but it wasn't much. And I later went back and calculated it. I made $9.20 per hour average. Obviously, at the end, I was making more. In the beginning, I was making nothing, but $9.20 average for 16 years. And we still were able to do this. And so when I answered his question, he was like, "Do you think I could do this? And would you teach me how to do it?" And when I had 2 or 3 conversations or 4 or 5 conversations like that, I was like, maybe there's something I have to offer in this part of my life that I never talked about. In the mission field, you're not going to talk about money. You're not going to talk about politics. You're going to talk about people's problems and their lives and what they need. And so it wasn't an easy decision for me to actually start talking about this because it's kind of taboo, but I decided this is the next way that I can help people, is kind of help people break free from that paycheck to paycheck grind. It doesn't have to be that way. I'm testimony to that even on a meager salary, with enough determination and setting the right parameters in your lives and looking at each paycheck with the correct philosophy, you can build a multi-million-dollar net worth, if you just follow the right steps. And so that's what the book is all about.
Yeah. And the book is called The Hacker Method.
Yep,
And
I got a copy of it right here. The Hacker Method comes out February 27th.
I love it. The cover art and everything is beautiful. It's a good looking book, and kind of just talk us. I mean, you've done, I think, a good job there describing the genesis of the book, and I think in there captured a pretty good profile of who your intended audience there is.
Yeah.
Kind of the person that's in the grind of working a W-2, maybe struggling to really increase their income, but has doubts about their ability to build wealth through real estate. Am I getting that, summarizing that right, as far as who you're?
Perfect. Yes,
Okay.
That's exactly right.
Solid. So just kind of talk us through where the book starts. Like, what's the first step that you're encouraging people to take, or what's the first real takeaway that you want them to get as they're diving into the book there?
So I'll start with the art. It's not just a cute pig in an airplane. So if you've ever heard, there's kind of an old saying, when you say something's not, or when you say so and so is going to have such and such is going to happen, the phrase would be, "Yeah, when pigs fly," right? Which means, yeah, that's never going to happen. Well, I have a pig that's also a piggy bank, right? So, yeah, I'm never going to break out of this paycheck to paycheck grind. No matter what I do, it doesn't work. Pigs can't fly. Well, if they climb in an airplane, they can fly. So it's a hack. A pig is not going to sprout wings and fly, but he can jump in something else that has wings and he can fly. And so the method, the H.A.CK.E.R method, is an acronym. So H.A.CK.E.R is 5 steps. And if you're doing the math, H.A.CK.E.R has 6 letters, but the third step is CK, cash is king investing. So that's 2 letters is 1 step. So the book walks through the 5 steps how to hack your way into the wealthy class, even on limited income. H is hack your lifestyle. You've got to begin to look at your paycheck in a different way than most people look at their paycheck. Most people, and me included when I first started, I'd get this paycheck, and right out of high school when I didn't have any money, and now I've got a real job. Wow, how am I going to spend all this money? So I would look at my paycheck and I would think, how can I spend this money? What we need to do as people who are building wealth is we need to look at our paycheck and we need to say, okay, paycheck, instead of you telling me what I'm going to do, I'm going to tell you what to do. 50% of you is going to cover my living expenses. 40% of you is going to be investing for my future, and 10% is going to be given away to make the world a better place. So we talk about how to hack your lifestyle to make that not just possible, but also not uncomfortable. Because a lot of people think, oh, 50% of my income, how in the world could I live on that? Well, we dive into ways that you can do that. House hacking is one of the key components to that, to where you've got to look at your personal spending differently than everybody around you looks at their personal spending. And if you can capture that you can capture that lifestyle hack, then you can go to allocation budgeting, which is the A. Then you can go to cash is king investing, which is the fun part. Like, how do you turn $1 into 2, into 10, into 20, into 1,000, into 1,000,000? And then E, exponentiality. How do you get good at getting fantastic returns on your investment? And then R is review what you're doing. Is it still working? If so, repeat. If it's not, if what you're reviewing is not working, don't repeat it, rework it. And then once you've reviewed it, repeated it, reworked it, then it's time to reward yourself. And the last R, it's strategically placed at the end because you need to do the hard work up front. Lifestyle hacking, the budgeting, the investing. And then at the end, that's where you get to reward yourself.
That's such a helpful framework. I love that.
Good.
Yeah. No, that's such a clear breakdown. And so I know that for our listeners, that's going to be extremely valuable for them to pick up and to go through. One of the concepts that you mentioned, I'm not sure exactly how explicitly you get into it in the book, but as I've listened to some of your things on YouTube, you talk about adapting microculture.
Yeah.
And I was hoping that you could unpack that, because that's a concept that I'm not as familiar with and wanted to understand a bit more of what you mean there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the key to all this, honestly. So, and having lived in other cultures, I'm hyper aware of culture. I'm aware of my family's culture, my neighborhood culture. And to be honest, if you grow up in a culture, it's one of those things that you are in, and it affects you in a lot of different ways, but you're probably not even aware of it. But because I've been exposed to such radically different cultures, I'm hyper sensitive to it. And sometimes I see Americans doing something that a Latino would never do, and I chuckle to myself and know I can't say anything because nobody's going to understand why that's funny to me, right? But that has helped me to identify what are the primary reasons why someone who genuinely wants to get out of the paycheck to paycheck grind, but just really struggles figuring out how to do that. It's because of the culture that they came from, the culture that they're living in. Macroculture, I talk about this in the book, but macroculture I would think of as like your national culture or your regional culture. Like Southern culture is different from Midwest, which is different from the Northwest, which is different than the Southwest, and different from the Northeast. Even in just within the United States. And then, Austin is different than Dallas. Phoenix is different than Tucson. LA is different than San Francisco. So you have all these macro cultures that are affecting you. Microculture is going to be maybe the neighborhood you live in. It's going to be the family that you live in. It's going to be the family that you came from. And macro culture, people like Abraham Lincoln or Julius Caesar, they shift macro culture. The rest of us, we can have an influence on microculture, and we all can. So if you are in a job culture that is holding you back, change jobs. That's how you change microculture. If you're on a street of people, let's say you're on a street of people that are mostly college age and they're throwing keggers in the street every weekend, you can change that culture. If you are in a neighborhood where you feel like, man, I'm going to make a bad decision because the 3 houses next to me, they all have brand new Corvettes. And if I don't get a brand new Corvette, I'm not keeping up with my neighbors. Man, you need to shake loose of that and change that culture. Within your own local family, you can change your local family culture. You can have a family meeting and say, you know what? We're going to learn together entrepreneurship. We're going to find mentors that's going to talk to us about what does it take to go from where we're at, struggling paycheck to paycheck with credit card bills up to our nostrils, and how are we going to break out of this? And we're going to listen to people who have done it, and we're going to break free from this. That's microculture that everybody with the determination and the decision in their own hearts can have an impact on. It's not like macroculture. Well, I'm not going to change the culture of of my city. So what's the point? We can change our microculture.
That's such a helpful framework too, because it, to your point, is that's the things you can control. And I think a lot of times we have this perspective, maybe naturally, or maybe just because of our experiences, that we can't control, what happens, or we're just along for the ride. And I think, even Brandon Turner, as we've all talked about him, he talks about getting the driver's seat. And so really that adopting and changing in that microculture is, hey, what are the things you can be in the driver's seat for? And how do you spend your time? And how do you spend your money? And how do you spend your efforts and energy? And that's all the things that you're talking about. Now,
very well said. Yep.
Well, and another thing in the book, and I want to go a little bit further into that, because we don't have a lot of folks on the podcast talk too much about budgeting, but that is a big step in this that comes after that microculture. That's one of those things we get to control a lot. So talk us through a little bit about one. You have this concept of gamifying budgeting and making it fun. I think a lot of times people hear that statement budgeting and they just freak out, or they recoil, or they put up the walls.
It's a terrible word. Even just coming like out of your mouth, it feels awful, right? Like budgeting. But so yeah, as you talk in the book about this concept of gamifying it, my eyes lit up a bit in a way that they never have, as I've thought about budgeting in the past. So
so I'm glad that resonates with you. I've had other people mention that as well. And you do need to make it a game, and you need to understand what's the how do I beat this game? How do I win this game? And okay, you don't like the word budget. Okay, let's say project then. Let's have a financial project. I'm gonna build this project, or I'm gonna create a plan for success. Budget, that's what budgets are. And I know that they're a downer because they feel like a diet, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I got to stop eating all the food that I love to eat. I got to stop buying all the stuff that I love to buy. Well, what I do in my book is I try to reframe how we spend our money. And let's just use the house hack example as one of 5 different things that I tackle it's the game part of it. Okay, so for example, in 1950, the average size home was 970 square feet. Today, the average new construction home. Today, the average new construction is 2,400 square feet, almost 3 times larger than in 1950. In 1950, our families were 3.5 people. Today, they're 2.5 people. So our homes have tripled. Our families have shrunk by a third. And now each member of our family is occupying almost the same square footage in our homes that was the entire home in 1950. And yesterday's luxury is today's expectation, and we have to understand that we have, in order for us to build wealth, especially if we're on a meager salary, in order for us to build wealth, we cannot live luxurious lives today. We can later. We'll build a multi-million-dollar net worth, and we can absolutely splurge. And Dave Ramsey says, don't buy a brand new car until you can afford to lose money on it. Yes, that's good. That's a good tip. Don't buy a 2,400 square foot home or a 3,400 square foot home until you can afford to do that. If you want to build wealth, let's gamify this. House hacking. You could buy a 2,500 square foot home, carve off a section of it, rent out part of it to as a studio apartment to somebody who can't afford to get their own house, have them pay half your mortgage, then take that money that you saved on your housing and invest it. And if you do that with all these different areas of your life, just look at it as a game. So whatever savings that you have, you invest that, and then you watch that investment gain 10% and then 20%, and then it doubles and then it snowballs. That's the idea.
Yeah.
Well, and I think we play the game to win, right? Everybody wants to play. When we start playing games, the mindset is, I want to win. I want to do this. And so I think you're right. Oftentimes the mindset of budgeting is eliminating and losing and removing and cutting things out. Whereas this mindset and the shift that you encourage people to make is, hey, play the long game. And that's so countercultural to everything today as instant gratification. You got to get it now. You got to build it now, or you got to be able to have it now, or you're not living the good life.
Yep. Yeah. One of the things I say in the book is, we buy brand new cars and big houses to make it look like we're successful, but we're not. We're broke.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can have the discipline to be smart about how you're spending your money now, later on you are wealthy, and you will be able to go buy that big house, and you will be able to have 5 nice cars if that's what you want, and you actually will be successful and wealthy. Whereas now you look wealthy and successful, but you're broke and you're stressed, and you get to the end of the month and you got less paycheck than you got bills, and you're frustrated, and and you kick the dog, and all that stuff that comes out that's negative in it. It's backwards. And so the concept of gamifying the budget is, if you can follow the prescription that I have on allocation budgeting, which is the A in H.A.CK.E.R, follow that prescription, you can actually increase your clothing budget, your entertainment budget, your dining out budget, your vacation budget. You can increase those categories if you're willing to tackle some of these massive luxury items like the home and the car and credit card balances that is getting you something today that you can't keep, that doesn't have value down the road, right? So if you can gamify all of those things, you can actually live on a bigger budget, barring those few categories where we're working on gamifying and thinking through to the future.
Yeah. And I love how that just goes hand in hand with what you were talking about before in the microculture, of just having an awareness of there are unhealthy money habits in the microculture that is around me, but that you have a very empowering message in your book and just in everything that you're communicating. And that, hey, even though there's these unhealthy culture around us, we're not beholden to that. We do have the power to make the change by reframing the way that we see budgeting, by following the steps that you recommend in the allocation budgeting. So I love that message of hope. I know that that's going to be really helpful to your audience and to our listeners here. And then I wanted to get into, obviously you've got all of the experience on the mission field. You've lived your life very purposefully with a lot of mission. I know that there's a lot that's exciting. We've talked here about the growing wealth and being able to have the luxuries later in life as you do it well. But I also want to talk for you personally. What does it mean to be wealthy? What's the point of it all? I mean, you've touched on generosity some earlier. I know that a big priority for you personally, and as you talk about in the book, is the importance of people and people over money. But that's a big, broad question. But under the umbrella of wealth, what is a wealthy life?
Yeah, that is such a great question. And I'm so glad you asked it. And I think everybody listening to this needs to ask themselves that question and come up with an answer. Your answer can change down the road, by the way, but come up with an answer. So everything that I'm doing now is, everything in my life really is based on 3 philosophies. One of them is, as a human being, as a father, as a husband, as a neighbor, as a member of my community, as someone who's working with people and helping them break out of the paycheck to paycheck trap. My job is to maximize everything that I've been given: my money, my relationships, my time, my energy, my health, my marriage, my neighborhood. That's my responsibility, to maximize everything that I've got. And at the same time, the second philosophy is, put relationships ahead of my money, put relationships ahead of my wealth, my whatever all this stuff is. And those two things are opposing forces, and they keep each other in check, right? And then the third philosophy is, be extremely generous. And it kind of ties those two things together. If I can build significant wealth, and if I put relationships first, generosity is just going to spill out, right? If I'm trapped in a paycheck to paycheck grind where I'm literally getting to the end of the month I'm getting to the end of the month and I have bills due that I don't have enough paycheck to cover, that stresses my relationships. Forget about being generous. That takes time away from my health and my family and my neighborhood, because I have to go grind out another $1,000. And so I think building wealth is something that actually creates freedom and abundance. And I think that as human beings, and even as Christian human beings, that is our responsibility. My basis for that biblically is Matthew 25, parable of the talents, where Jesus is telling the story, and he talks about this wealthy person that gives talents to these three individuals. And anybody who thinks that the talent that he's talking about is like plate spinning, that's not the kind of talent we're talking about. It's a talent is basically in today's dollars like $1 million of gold. There's another version that says the parable of the bags of gold. So we can't be confused what we're talking about here. And he says give $5 million of gold to one guy, 2 million to one guy, and 1 million to the third guy. The first two guys go about investing the money and they double their money. The third guy is afraid and he buries it in a hole in the backyard. And when the owner of the money comes back and says, "Okay, what'd you do with the money that I gave you?" The first two guys give him double what they gave him, and the third guy gives him everything back that he gave him. The response here to me is very instructive. The master tells the first two guys that doubled their money, "Well done, good and faithful servant." That famous line in the Bible. "Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of the Lord." And, theologians would say that sounds like heaven. Then he turns to the guy that just gave him all his money back. Mindful, he didn't lose anything, right? He gave him back what he was given. He says, "You wicked and lazy servant. Throw him out where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth." Theologians might think that that's hell. So what I take from that is if we don't maximize everything that we have been given, we are failing. Now, even if we go about the work of maximizing it and we lose out, we make a mistake and we lose some money or we lose something, at least we are like Theodore Roosevelt, at least we're in the arena. We're marred by sweat and blood and tears, but at least we're in the arena and we're not the poor soul that knows neither victory nor defeat. That is what we as human beings are supposed to strive towards. And I apply that to wealth, but I apply that to every area of my life as well.
That absolutely factors into every part of life. I mean, like you're saying, this is tied to relationships, it's tied to calling, it's tied to success, and all of these work hand in hand. I think what I love so much about your story as well is that you've experienced the power of radical generosity because of how willing people were to give when you were on the mission field. And so you got to see lives changed. You got to see the impact in the communities and in the culture you were at. And all of that was only because people were willing to be radically generous. And so that's such a unique and helpful framework and such a helpful, powerful tool to push that forward. And that's, I think, why we continue on the mission.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Yeah, completely agree. Now, I don't live out those three philosophies perfect every day, but I strive to, right?
Still human, and I can appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. This is rich, and I know that we could keep unpacking each one of the letters in the H.A.C.K.E.R acronym. And as much as I would love to do that, the good news is that you've written a book that thoroughly does unpack those, and so. We won't spoil all of the goodness that's in there for our listeners. I do encourage everybody to pick up a copy of the H.A.C.K.E.R method, which really by the time that this episode is released, it should be available widely, right? I mean, I know I've seen at least the link on Amazon, which I think is where 98% of the world is getting their books these days.
Right.
At the end of the show, I will circle back and we'll include show notes. But if there's a better spot for people to pick that up, we'll include a link to that too. But awesome. As we start to land the plane, Nick, do you want to take us into our golden nugget round?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do that. And Brian, I know we forewarned you. We were jumping into this here at the end. However, I think we've covered most of these categories today, so it might be a little bit of repetition, but we're going to go for it. Right. So,
sure.
We talk At Abundant Journey about the 5 F's, how they're all connected, but I'm only going to make you pick one. And so we have family, finance, faith, fitness, and future. As we're here early in 2024, what is one of those categories you're focused on and looking to grow in this year?
Yeah, so I'm gonna pick. I'm working on all of those all the time, trying to improve. But let me pick family. We were gone for so long, and obviously when we came back, we would visit as much family as we possibly could. But my wife and I both, we're trying to be really intentional with our family, and this kind of comes back to wealth. Building wealth gives you an opportunity to do more with and for your family. And one example is we have an uncle who's very ill with ALS, and he's struggling. And it was a Tuesday, and we decided we're just going to drive to Yuma, Arizona, where they're at, 3 hours away. We're just going to go drive. We're going to spend the day with them. You can't do that if you're paycheck to paycheck. You can't do that if you used up all your vacation days and it's a Tuesday. And I think that that's just one of those things to where if we can put some focus on that and gamify our budget and all those different things, it just opens up opportunities for us to maximize our relationships in ways that is much more difficult when we don't have that kind of freedom. And so we're trying to take advantage of that and focus more on our family and be more generous with them and spend more time with them. And so that's what we're working on this year. But I am working on all those. We could
Yeah.
talk about all of them, but I think
No,
that's one that's important for me because we've been gone so long for so far away.
yep. No, I think that's great. And I think the listener who listens here, and it's, I love, again, the cover art where if pigs fly, and you're just a living example of that. I mean, you have lived out the freedom and the potential that the wealth brings, but the people matter most. And you've said
Yeah,
that over and over. People matter, the ability to significantly impact relationships, deepen relationships. That's the true end goal
yeah,
here.
yep.
And so I love that answer. Next one here, what's a quote? And you just gave us a couple, but what's a quote from book or mentor that stuck with you along your journey?
Yeah. So I've got a bunch, and I love that Theodore Roosevelt quote. And whenever I'm having a rough day, I just read that whole thing. It's a pretty long paragraph actually, and you just read the whole thing, and you're like, okay, yeah, I'm just like Teddy. Um, uh, I would say that I had a mentor. I had a mentor. His name is George Fermanian. He's an amazing guy. I don't know, he made $100 million or something like that, building big apartment complexes in San Diego. And I called him up one day, and this is a tip too, by the way. When you know someone who's been successful, um, ask them to mentor you. They may say no, but they might say yes. And I called this guy who was this mega guy, and I said, "Hey, would you mentor me?" He goes, "Yeah, of course. Send me over your portfolio. Let's talk." So I sent him over my thing, and I jump on the phone. I'm so excited to get tips from him. And the first thing he says, "You have way too much equity." And I was like, "What? Way too much equity? How could you have too much equity?" And he just explained. He broke down, explained to me the importance of leverage on appreciating and income producing real estate, and he just kind of taught me the game that took him from nothing to 100 million, and just really kind of gave me that lesson. And I will just never forget that. You've got way too much equity, which is completely opposite of
Hmm.
what
Yeah.
you think you're trying to accomplish, right? So now he wasn't saying you have too much wealth. He was saying your buildings are not producing enough because you have too much equity in each building. So
Hmm.
just that little nugget right there, it's just yeah, it's just always been very powerful for me.
That's super
Yeah.
helpful. And I think on that, the leverage game, when you truly understand how to do it well and safely, like you have,
Yeah,
the options are endless and the sky's the limits. So that's
yeah,
exciting.
yep.
Next one here, what's a dream or goal that you have that you've not been able to make happen yet?
I would love to help 1,000 people become multimillionaires. That's a
Mm.
goal that I have, and the book is the first step in that. We're also launching a community where we're going to journey together, and work through the hacker method and all that kind of stuff. And actually, I have a website, theunexpectedinvestor.com is the website, and the community has launched there. And so, yeah, I want 1,000 people to join alongside of me and break out of the paycheck to paycheck grind and start to build wealth so that they can put relationships first and become extremely generous in the process.
That's so good. Excited to be a part and walk that journey with you. So that's awesome. Last question here. At the end of your life, what do you hope you'll be remembered for?
I one time jokingly I told my wife, when I die, I want somebody to put up a statue of me. And she was like, "Oh, that's the worst thing in the world to say." And I had to clarify it. And I said, I want the fact that I have made such a big impact on the community that they would want to do something like that. Not because I want a place for pigeons to land, but I want to have that level of an impact that people don't know any other way but to express their appreciation for what we've done. I really want to impact my environment in a positive way, right? So yeah, I'll stick with that. My wife is going to be really upset, but that's it.
uh, that's amazing, man. No, I love it. I mean, even seeing the Kobe Bryant statue that just went up outside of Staples Center in LA, and yeah, it's like it's a testament to the kind of impact that he's had on that city and that place, and so yeah, what an honor that would be. And throughout this entire interview, I mean, I just love the consistency in what you're doing. Certainly, you've been very successful yourself in real estate and entrepreneurship. It would be easy, much easier to just hoard everything that you have learned and to just be content with that. But you have been incredibly generous with your time and with your knowledge. I know that writing a book is not a task for the faint of heart. It's right. Easy to take it for granted when you walk into a Barnes and Noble or you're looking along Amazon and seeing all of these finished books. But I know that just takes hours and hours and hours of writing, of thinking, of editing, of going back and forth. So that's an incredibly generous thing that you've done. As I say time and time again to all of our listeners, there's just no better way to invest 20, 30, whatever the cost of the book is. The return on that $20, $30, as you're talking about here, could lead to a life that is filled with multi-millions. So excited about the community that you're launching. Very grateful that you've written the book. Very, very grateful for all of the ways that what you're doing resonates with what we're trying to build here at Abundant Journey and with our little tribe and community of listeners and members. So for people to connect further with you, I know you've mentioned the Unexpected Investor. I'm going to drop the link to that in the description. Cool. There'll also be a link to where people can pick up the H.A.CK.E.R method. Where is the best spot for people to grab that? Can they get that from the Unexpected Investor website, or where would you have them go?
Yeah, we're actually pointing everybody to Amazon.
Perfect.
And we're actually offering the Kindle version for just 99 cents for the first 7 days. So from February 27th to March 5th, it's 99 cents. And the reason for that, it is, I wanted to give first. I want to get it into as many hands as we possibly can, want to have an impact. And so there's just no excuse not to pick it up if it's 99 cents, right?
No,
so
that's an absolute no-brainer. That's awesome.
Yeah. And then the paperback is 20 and the hardback is 25. But yeah, Amazon's the best place to go. But if you search, it'll pop up on other sites. But Amazon's the best place to go.
Yeah. And one thing that I'll encourage our listeners to do is certainly pick it up, but then also leave a review. I know how helpful that can be as far as people discovering it. And then are you active anywhere on social media? If people wanted to just follow along, what are some of the handles or where would you have them go? Where are you most active?
Yeah, we're on TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and all 4 of those is at Unexpected Investor. So just type in that tagline or that handle. That's where we're at. We'd love to have you join on. We're very active on all those channels.
Fantastic. I love it, man. Well, all of those links in the description below. So listeners, do be sure to check those out. And while you're at it, if you would leave the Abundant Journey podcast a review, share it with a friend. Let's get the message about the Hacker method out as far and wide as we possibly can. But Brian, this has been an amazing conversation. Super grateful for you. Grateful for your time. Wish you all the best with the book and as you continue to grow this community and help people on their path to wealth and a good life.
Thank you both, Nick and Nick. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with you. It was so much fun, and let's stay connected. Let's keep working together.
Absolutely. Listeners, thanks again for coming along with us. We'll be back next week for another episode. We'll see you then.